Welcome back, everyone. I know it's been a little bit since the last episode, but I get squirreled pretty easy. And if you've seen that episode where I refinished or remolded, I guess, the rollers for the joiner planer, since I had those done, I was kind of wanting to get that pile of parts put back together before I started forgetting where they went. So that's burned up a little bit of my time, but today we're going to get back to the hydraulic press. I'm going to work on the base, but actually I guess there in the background you can see, I'll take you over there real quick, you can see the planer. It's for the most part back together. I do have to put the knives on it. They're kind of a funny height planer. They're not really a bench top model, but if you set them on the ground, they were very, very low. So I threw together a mobile base for it. I decided to do it out of wood instead of metal. So I think that came out pretty good. It's got 4 locking casters, both the swivels and the wheels lock. So when they're locked, it's pretty stable. So other than, like I said, putting the knives back on it and adjusting the knives, it's pretty much ready to go. So I got a couple more pieces of the sheet metal for the dust hood that I got to clean up a little bit. But other than that, and it turns on and runs. And there is guards that go over the dust collection, doubles as a guide. So anyway, we'll get back to the press and the base I'm working on here. I'll tilt you down. I just did a quick sketch here on the dry erase board. Just to give you an idea what I'm doing, this would be a top-down view. So the shaded in areas here, that's the C channel. You can kind of see that shape closer. So these shaded areas, that's the channel looking down from the top. I'm going to use the 2-inch angle iron, so there'll be, these lines should actually connect. There'll be 2-inch angle iron that the channel sets down in. This thinner line here is the leg of the channel, or the angle iron. So there'll be 2 legs. I'll cut a miter on it on both sides to come out to a center point. And so the dotted areas here will be the wheels. Probably in the case of this one, these wheels will be fixed and that one be a swivel. The reason why I did 3 wheels is I think I mentioned it when I was talking about the design. 3 wheels will always sit even on the floor, not necessarily plumb or flat, but they'll always sit because 3 points make a perfect plane. So if you have a floor that's a little bit off and you have something that has 4 wheels that's really rigid, the odds of all 4 wheels touching are not that good. So this will allow it to be a little bit more stable. And then this, since the back's tied together with the triangular, that holds that pretty stable. I didn't want to put a bar here because if you want to kind of step in and be somewhat close, it's almost like a toe kick on a cabinet. So there'll be a small cross member here that ties them together, but that'll be in a little bit ways. So when you're standing here, envision if this was your feet, you could stand here without anything getting in the way. So anyway, that's the overall design. I did draw it up on CAD. On the CAD, I printed that out so I know exactly what the angles are and what the cut lengths are. So I'm going to get going cutting the steel out, and we'll get this thing glued together, and then I'll use that as one point to set the 2 upright widths the correct distance apart. And then I'll start working on the upper mount where the cylinder will go. I got sidetracked and I didn't get the cylinder or the ram ordered until today. I know what the dimensions are, so I'll probably can lay most of it out and tack a few things in place, but I won't do the final welding until the cylinder's there, which should be probably by the next video. So anyway, I'll set you back here and we'll get going. What I was doing there was just getting the saw set to, it worked out to be 63.5 degrees for the first cut of that first piece. I'm going to try not to make a mistake here. For anybody that's worked with angle iron and miters, you know that because angle iron is not symmetrical, unlike square tubing or something like that, there is definitely a left and a right. If you cut the miter and one angle and you need the leg of the angle to be on a certain side, you can flip it around and you end up having your miter the wrong way. So I always kind of double check myself and envision the part being laid out in real time and make sure that I cut the miter in relation to the upright leg in the correct spot. But I'll admit there's been more than one time when I haven't paid close enough attention and had to cut a second piece. Actually, kind of what helps me keep it all straight in that regard is laying the pieces out roughly as I cut them. And then any early errors, I find those pretty quick versus making more than one error. So right here I've got to cut a miter going the other direction. So instead of having to swing the blade and reset that angle up again, I find it easier just to rotate the angle 90 degrees. And then that changes the angle of the miter in relation to the long axis. So you have to be a little careful if you're going to clamp angle iron like this, since it's not nearly as stable up on edge. What I did there was just mark an indication of which way the miter needs to go. As I mentioned, it can get pretty confusing with angle iron, so I knew, because I was going to flip the material end for end, I didn't want to lose track of that orientation, so I just did a quick angled mark with the soapstone there. The reason why I flipped it around there is that I've got two of those angles or two cuts that are that same angle, and then the next two cuts are a different angle. So instead of changing the saw twice, I just leave it at that initial angle. I'll make the cut on the opposite end, and then so my next two pieces will be off of the opposite ends of the stick. Well, I cut all my angles correct, at least in relation to the leg on the angle. So now, as long as the lengths were correct, it should be the right size. Tip you down there, so that's what basically it looks like. The inside dimension is supposed to be, I did it right, 25 and 5/8. So I'll just lay these two legs out to that dimension and see how it all fits. Pretty close, a little, maybe just a tick long on one of them, because take you down here. The gap on the peak point is just, it's opened up a tiny little bit, but certainly nothing that can't fill up with weld. So that was a success, not that it was a complicated shape or project. I'll cut the one spreader bar, that's what's left to cut, and I'll probably just, this trailer is really flat. One of these days I'd love to have one of those really nice welding tables with all the dog holes in them, either a Fireball or some of the other brands. I've kind of got an idea and some plans of building something similar, so maybe I'll do that on the channel at some point. But for now, this trailer is, like I said, it's pretty darn flat, so I will lay it out. I'll get that last piece cut, and then I will lay it out and bring you right back. Okay, I'll tip you down here. I got that last peak cut. It was just straight with square cut corners, so nothing too interesting there. So that's why I did that off camera. I also knocked off all the sharp edges and the burrs. And then the last thing I did, not that it would have been critical, but it just makes it look a little nicer. And if you would ever, I guess, step down there or lean over or something, I took and I knocked off these corners right here. Put a 45 on those, so that way there's not that sharp edge there in the event. Plus it makes it look a little nicer. So, other advantage kind of using the trailer, one thing nice about this, a couple things nice about the trailer. One, because it's diamond plate, any little shavings or things kind of fall down below the diamond, so that kind of gives you the highest points on the diamonds is what your material sets on. Sorry, the tripod was leaning there, which is a little bit better than just sitting on a flat piece of steel. Also, the diamonds kind of act like as if you had graph paper or grid paper. It lets you square things up real easily in relation to just lining up the diamonds, because the diamond plates on this trailer in a width-wise configuration, 8 foot wide by 4 foot deep. So. And then lastly, it's an aluminum trailer, all aluminum. The diamond plate's aluminum, the frame's aluminum. So when you're welding, none of the spatter sticks to it. So anyway, as you can see, I've got it laid out here, squared up with the diamonds. I double checked my measurements. So I'll get the welder over here. I'll tack these up, since there's really no easy way to clamp these down. I'm just gonna, and this is a base for that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, since there's 3 points, so I'm going to just carefully tack it a little bit at each one of the joints before I get carried away with welding it, to try to cut down on how much the metal pulls when I do final weld it. And so we'll get going on that. basically what I did there is I just welded every intersection of all 4 portions or the 4 points on the legs of the angle. So that should hold it. Should hold it well enough for what this is going to be. I'll finish getting welded out, and I probably won't, in this case, this one, I don't need to worry about grinding the welds down. The only place I'll grind the welds down is on that forward point, because there'll be a wheel or a caster bolted to that. I'll grind that flat. Other than that, I'll just leave the welds the way they are. Alright, so that didn't take long to weld that out. I didn't even bother to run a bead on this very front one, just to grind it all back down. It was pretty good. I can see through there was a little bit, that was the one with a little bit of that gap, so it penetrated just fine. So that makes up the base for the press. The upright channels, they'll fit in this front section here in between that first miter and that cross member. So again, like I said, you can put my feet in this area when you're standing in front. So got a few other chores I got to get to, so I'm going to stop this one here. There's probably not enough content for one episode, so I imagine I'll be right back shortly with some other work. All right, everyone, it's a couple days later. There was room in this episode for some more footage, so we're going to pick back up where I left off, and I put the longitudinals on the press onto the base. But before I do, it's obviously a different day. I got a different shirt on, so I did finish up on the planer and get the knives installed, and I got those calibrated in. They make jigs for doing that, but as I bought this used, there wasn't any of that equipment with it. So all I did is I just put a dial indicator on a 1, 2, 3 block. I set that on the table, zero the dial indicator, and then move that over and use that dial indicator to dial the knives in. So anyway, I'm going to make a pass here both through the joiner and the planer so you can see that, and then we will get back to the press. Get your tip down here so you can get a little bit better angle. Because it's on a common shaft and one motor that runs both the planer and the joiner, and the joiner, you're using the top of the cutter on the top of the table, and the planer, the underside, you actually feed from opposite ends, depending on which operation you're going to do. I've just got a strap 4x4 here. So that's that. So I'm guessing that the rubber urethane, the liquid urethane that I used on the rollers must have been about the right durometer, because it seems to grip that wood and feed it through just fine. So let's get back over to the press. Okay, so I did do a little bit of setup off the camera, as you guys having to watch me measure and remeasure and check for square and plumb and tap pieces around it. It's probably pretty boring. So my setup was just frankly getting it set down on the table. You can see here on the left, and getting it things square, plumb, parallel, all those different dimensions you measure. What I did is, you probably can't tell from there, but it's sitting up on a block about 7/8 of an inch, 4 blocks, and the reason being is the 2 cross pieces up here at the top that hold the ram, to allow room for the ram in between them. That resulted in them being farther apart than what the total 6 inches of the channel here is. So they stick up about, I think it's about 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, right at 3/4 of an inch. So what I did so that the one cross member could sit flat on the trailer, I just raised the main frames up, like I said, about 7/8 of an inch. That allowed for room for the ram plus a little bit of space in there. So that's what I did on that end. This table piece, that's just clamped on there just as a help stabilize things a little bit. The top 2 pieces are clamped in place. The base down here, it's also just clamped in place, plumbed and squared. So it's pretty much everything's exactly where it needs to be. As far as parallel, square, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do, a shape like this that has lots of different intersecting joints and stuff welds out pretty good, because I'll go along and tack pretty much all those little places where there's an intersection between one piece and the other before I start doing any major welding, and that way it really locks that the whole weldment into a structurally sound position, so that when I do start doing longer weld beads, it won't pull out of shape. So I'll get going here on that, get this thing welded up. We'll tip it up on its stand, and then you kind of get a rough idea what it looks like. Alrighty, that does it. Small project like this doesn't take long to finish all the welding, so I think I'm going to run into the house and grab the casters. Those came, I think it was yesterday. Grab the casters, throw those on there so I can stand it up, and that'll get you a little bit better look at it, so I'll stand by here a couple. Alrighty, so I guess I'll maybe talk about why I'm using casters. Some of you might be wondering why, because typically a press would sit directly on the floor, which is indeed true. And my shop's decent size, but I've found over the years if you have a special project and something's in the way, whatever the situation may be, then you have to kind of wrestle heavily your equipment around. So anything pretty much I've been doing of late, like the joiner planer, things like that, I either put on casters or a mobile base, because it just makes it easier to move things around as needed. Yes, they make, and I have some on my table saw, they make casters that retract. So when you release them, the weight of the machine still sits down on the floor, but given the press is pressing between the table and the top, there's really no loads on the bottom of the press. So, and those retracting ones take up a little bit more space. So I'm just going to go with traditional non-retracting casters. As I mentioned, I'll have 2 of them here. These fixed style, I think these are rated at 600 pounds each, so they'll be more than sufficient. And then one swivel double locking. It locks the wheel and locks the swivel. Will go on that 3rd spot. So they are set up with bolt holes in them, but the bolt hole pattern You may be able to see there the bolt hole pattern is about the same width as the angle, so I'd have to drill new bolt hole patterns. So I'm a fan of, if I don't think I'll ever have to take it off again, which I probably won't, I'm a fan of just tacking stuff on. I'm not going to weld them fully on. I'll just probably run a 1-inch bead or so on each end, on this end and this end. So if I do ever have to take them off, it's easy enough to cut the weld loose. Alrighty. Let's see if I can stand this up without something bad happening. Scooch you back here. Because it's not exactly light. I think that'll work. Yeah, I like the way that turned out. All right, well, that should give you enough content here for this episode, so I think I'll cut it off, and then I'll bring you back in the next episode. We'll start on the table, what I'm going to do on that. A lot of presses, like especially the Harbor Freight ones, maybe not a lot, but the Harbor Freight ones are kind of bolted together. The top part's welded, but the legs bolted on. That way you can slide the table up and bolt it back together. I wanted that all to be welded together, so my table will be the spacer pins that hold the two tables apart, 6 inches plus a little bit for play. I'm going to machine out some, I think, 1-inch pins, drill and tap those, and then it'll be bolted in. So anyway, the two halves will be sandwiched together this way, so I can add the table after it's all welded together like that. So I'll get the table built, and then I'm going to start working on the lifting mechanism. So again, thanks for watching my channel and my content. I hope you find it interesting, and I'll see you back in the next episode.